Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this webinar on tokenization and liquidity. We're going to be talking a little bit about this space and what innovations within this sector can mean for your business. Before we get started, though, a quick disclaimer. This webinar is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute financial advice. So just wanted to put that out there. It's a disclaimer from our legal team. There is a Q&A tab to the right on this webinar. If folks have questions as we go through the content, feel free to enter those questions in the Q&A tab. We're going to answer questions from the audience at the very end of the webinar. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So first and foremost, a quick round of introductions. Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten Rommel. I am a director of product marketing at Ripple, been at Ripple for almost 4 years now, based out of our San Francisco office. And I'm very much focused on our crypto liquidity products. We have two guest speakers that will be participating in this panel discussion, Brad and Marius, and I'll pass it over to them for some introduction. So Brad, feel free to provide a quick bio on yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, everyone, for joining in and participating today. Yeah, so my name is Brad Chase. I've been at Ripple about 7 years. Prior to Ripple, I worked in high-frequency trading and equity options space for a while. At Ripple, I now lead our liquidity products. For those who aren't familiar, Ripple has two kind of main products in market: a cross-border payments product called On-Demand Liquidity, and a more recent product that my team launched called Liquidity Hub that makes it seamless and easy for businesses to integrate crypto into their payment or into their business flows and operations. And we think broadly about a lot of the topics that we'll be covering today and really how to help enterprises integrate this technology for their customers and businesses. So Marius, happy to pass to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marius Jurgilas. I'm an ex-central banker with experience at the Bank of England, Norges Bank, and recently for the last 10 years at the Bank of Lithuania, which is an integrated supervisor and central bank. And I have been very closely involved in the issues like central bank digital currency, leading a working group at the BIS and European Central Bank Digital Euro High-Level Task Force. And recently, for the last year, I joined the private research lab, SuperHow, where we focus on blockchain, artificial intelligence, and privacy solutions. And I'm leading a project which I'm very excited about. And it's called Axiology, which is developing infrastructure for regulated tokenized securities. And I will be happy to talk about the benefits of tokenization and how can we provide more liquidity into the securities market.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that great background information. Super excited to get this discussion underway. For the audience, we obviously have some experts on the call, so it should be a very interesting conversation. But before we get into the in-depth discussion, I want to review some high-level definitions of tokenization and liquidity to sort of set the stage. So I'll pass it over to Brad to provide some background information here.
Absolutely. So tokenization and liquidity are really two key areas that really enable blockchain technology adoption. So tokenization on the left here is really about what started as blockchain technology around kind of pure counterparty-free native digital assets. So think Bitcoin or XRP. Those assets are only represented within a blockchain, but by virtue of them existing that way, we've gotten a lot of benefits in terms of security, in terms of auditability and traceability, in terms of speed in some cases for these assets. And as we've seen, kind of even with the up and down of the crypto market, continue adoption and use of these technologies, the question is, how can other assets that are not native to a blockchain be represented on the chain? And so tokenization is that concept. It's taking a real-world asset and representing that on the chain to be able to get that benefit and that technological benefit from it. Once there, you need this counterpart of liquidity, right? So not only do you kind of need to build the platform, you need the people and the users and the value flowing within it. And so liquidity really is that ability to buy or sell and kind of really enable really interoperability across these different asset classes and chains. It's the fluidity with which you can exchange between those mediums. And Marius, if you have any other comments, feel free to jump on.
Sure, maybe just from the other side, starting from liquidity. things are the way we measure them. And the way we could measure liquidity is how much does it cost us to convert something into ultimate liquid asset. And for the simplicity, the ultimate liquid asset is cash, right? And in financial markets, we're used to two concepts of liquidity. One is referred to as funding liquidity, and the other one is referred as to market liquidity. Funding liquidity is how much of a haircut do I have to take to pledge something of a value, which I believe is 100 to you, and you only give me less than 100. That's a haircut. The smaller the haircut, the more liquid or the more funding liquidity is there. And market liquidity is an ability to sell something which I value at 100 on the market with a small margin. And the size of the margin is also the definition of liquidity. Now, how do we usually get these markets, liquid markets that Brad was talking about, is through the concepts of centralization, usually, because the best liquid market is the one where we have all traders in one marketplace. And the most illiquid market is the one where all the traders are dispersed and they cannot meet each other. And so pooling is one way to obtain liquidity. We pool orders, buy and sell orders, merchants who sell grain. The other way to get more liquidity is by introducing mechanisms like netting. And those who are in cross-border payments definitely understand what I'm talking about, where you net the offsetting flows of payments. But these concepts of centralization go completely in the opposite direction, what Brad just quickly referred to as the notion of Web3 or decentralization, where we want to maintain the ownership or the ownership of an asset or digital asset that we have without a central authority. So how do we get this liquidity in a decentralized Web3 space is actually all the solutions that we'll be talking about today.
Perfect. So with these definitions in mind around tokenization and liquidity, Brad and Marius, just really curious to understand your perspective on why you think tokenization as a vertical is, or as a concept, is here to stay in the long term. So let's start off with Brad.
Absolutely, yeah. So this slide, I think, highlights quite well. So this is some respondents to the survey Ripple did, a new value report survey recently. So obviously, 70% of financial leaders are thinking of this technology and exploring it and see it as important for innovation for the next 3 years. So like on the output side of your question, yes, people are actually finance industry, especially at the institutional level, is really seeing an opportunity for these technologies. And it's really because of these benefits. So access to 24/7, 365 markets. The same way Marius was really talking about, the oddity of blockchain being decentralized and really public, like it's this very unique feel of you have kind of the shared public infrastructure to facilitate finance in a way that historically you could never have imagined because of counterparty risk and kind of having to be consistent in standards and whatnot. And so I think that's the key that gives rise to these benefits. 24/7, 365 access, improved efficiency and automation, greater financial flexibility and agility. And I think the space has seen this borne out well in the initial use cases of blockchain. And kind of like any good technology, you want to get those benefits in market and other areas. And so that's where I see kind of this durable need and opportunity to continue to leverage this technology.
Marius, any thoughts on your end?
Sure. Just to add to what has been just said, maybe one element, or just to stress that, is on transparency. And a good example of how or why we need transparency is, the usual financial markets or this concept of liquidity that I was referring to previously. If I cannot see what is the price that others are buying or selling a particular asset, I have no clue where the true price or what the fair price of an asset should be. And those who are dealing in those markets, those who have this private information, then they can abuse that private information and extract revenue from me. And that's unfair. So the more transparency we have in observing and talking here in technical terms, pre-trade and post-trade transparency, the better and more liquid financial markets we will have. And blockchain and tokenization can help in this.
Awesome. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, Brad, just curious to get your thoughts on what is your perspective on the overall opportunity size when it comes to tokenization? Do you see most of the opportunity within the Web3 crypto native space, or do you see it going beyond?
Definitely beyond. So if you go to the next slide, I think, yeah, we have some other statistics here on kind of the growth and percentage, tokenized markets. So we're talking on the right-hand side here, $16 trillion business opportunity, 10% of global GDP. It's definitely big beyond just Web3. And I guess, for those that may not be familiar, Web3 is come to the fore as a term in the past 2 or 3 years, and it's really recognizing kind of in the same way like the internet transformed how businesses work. We believe digital asset blockchain technologies will transform how businesses work, but there's a set of capabilities that need to be built to do that well. That's kind of how you manage decentralized identity. It's how you integrate with the blockchain directly. And so Web3 is kind of that kind of strategy, if you will, of like, how do you adopt this technology in kind of consistent manner? What are the standards that need to be in place? What are the kind of technological interoperability capabilities that need to be defined to enable this? But I see that more as a means to an end of this broader adoption. So I wouldn't kind of catalog Web3 as the end of a game. It's more like the stepping stone to becoming just a natural way in which you integrate other types of technology, other types of internet standards into financial practices and businesses.
Got it. And Marius, any thoughts from your end?
It's very hard to say how big the opportunity is because it really depends on how widespread this adoption of decentralized identity or the need to maintain digital ownership of an asset will be. And I guess we can even gravitate and go tangent from our discussion on assets, tokenization, and liquidity here to the issue of trust and geopolitical issues as well. I'm not trying to derail our conversation here, but that also is shaping the need and the size of this market. Because in the perfectly functioning world where everything is happy and everyone loves each other and there's peace on the world, you can reduce this system into single place of truth if you trust it and it works perfectly. But actually the world is not that simple, and there are borders, there are differences of views and mistrust, and the more or the less we'll have, that will define the size of this market. And this technology that we're talking about here is very good at helping us to navigate this uncertain and less trusting world.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And especially the comments around transparency and trust. And I think a lot of businesses are hoping that blockchain solutions can help fill a gap that we're seeing right now with in the market with current solutions. So just talking about innovative solutions being launched on the blockchain, I'm just curious to get both of your perspective on what businesses are finding value in tokenization today. So I'll pass it over to Brad if you have any high-level thoughts there.
Yeah, so I put it there's varying degrees of adoption in tokenization, right? So there's things that are stable coins that are kind of very widely used today, and that's a form of tokenization, right? You have a real-world dollar, some other asset that's been represented on chain, and it's one of the major part of the market cap of the crypto market today. And then I think there's kind of more and more use cases, and I'll pass to Marius because he's actually building some of these and working on them directly, but there's things about tokenizing bonds, real estate, carbon credits, and those are kind of maybe less widely adopted today, but that's where I think a lot of the excitement and problem solving is happening with the industry. But yeah, I'll let him highlight some of the work that he's done in this space.
Yeah, so just picking up there, and continuing this trust argument, the majority of global business relies on supply chains and supply chain financing. And for those who are not in that business, it's a lot of documents where you need to prove that a certain shipment of a container or multiple containers was actually loaded. The contain of a container is there, and all of that actually is being delivered in Amsterdam and distributed into final shop somewhere in Germany. Lots of tracking and tracing, and all of that can be put on a ledger, and the transactions and the signing of those transactions and the accountability of those transactions can be put into tokens, and that's where blockchain and tokenization comes into play. All of those transactions sometimes lead to consequences. For example, you didn't do a good job, or you misbehaved, and there are financial consequences, and you need to settle. And that's where concepts of stable coins or some kind of tokenized value exchange that Brad referred to is coming into play. Another good example, which is picking up speed in Europe, which is multiple countries under one European initiative, is so-called European Blockchain Initiative, where we're trying to resolve very simple issues. For example, if an individual from one country, a young individual, wants to get a job or apply to some public service, he needs to verify that he has finished or graduated from a certain university. And the issue of verifiable credentials, actually proving that you hold a degree in engineering, or you are a heart surgeon, is problematic because multiple languages, multiple universities, and this solution could provide a way, an efficient way, to verify these credentials. And the concepts that Brad also referred to in terms of tokenization of financial assets, this is usually referred to as process efficiency that financial institutions are always looking for to make their processes, which they have to do because we are obliged to do that due to regulation, as efficient as possible, because the more efficient the processes are, the cheaper are the transactions and the happier are the customers. And ultimately, maybe I'll just bring to your attention maybe something which is very obvious, which has been talked very widely, and which I have been participating also, is all the concept of digital currency as such, because that's also potentially could be the result of tokenization, because we could tokenize central bank reserves. Some critics would say, why would we need to do that? Because it's already sitting on a digital centralized record. Well, yes, but if we want to interact with those digital tokens, digital assets, or tokenized assets, which we are now referring to, we need tokenized form of settlement. And that's not the only, but one of the reasons why central banks around the world are intensely looking for the best way to introduce this digital notion of cash.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It definitely sounds like the concept of tokenization can touch a wide variety of industries, everything from shipping to traditional financial services, also to even manufacturing. Yesterday, Marius, during our practice session, you mentioned that there could be some tokenization benefits within the airplane manufacturing industry. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about that? I thought that was really fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all want to be safe with our money, with our pensions, with doctors, but also when we fly planes. Like, we would like to know that the plane has been handled very well and it's in a good shape, not like the plane of a German foreign affairs minister who didn't make it to Australia yesterday because the plane broke down in Dubai. And in the process of maintaining airplanes, because it is a shared responsibility, because planes go from one country to another, and if something breaks down in a different country, you have to maintain a record that this part meets a certain specifications. The mechanic who has been adjusting or putting that part is of certain quality, and all of that, these transactions go into record, usually paper record. And if you need to change hands of an airplane, and airplanes are assets, you not only ship the plane, you ship truckload of documents which go with the plane, because you need to prove to the new owner that all of the history that has been done of this airplane, and sometimes the history of an airplane is decades, 20, 30 years, has been maintained in a good order. All of that transactional history could be put on a verifiable, trusted, immutable record on the blockchain, and the transactions could be also settled utilizing tokenized concepts with which, again, we're talking about here. All of that links to liquidity, because this market is super complicated, and there's a lot of verification that needs to be done to make sure that once the asset is being changing hands, it's in good shape. And the more efficient this process would be, cheaper would be the transactions of these assets. And again, maybe the flights would be cheaper.
Yeah, super interesting example overall. So as a group, we've talked a lot about the benefits of blockchain, referencing concepts such as transparency, immutability. I think the benefits of tokenizing real world assets is pretty clear. But before this sector really picks up, what do you still think needs to evolve, perhaps from like a regulatory perspective or elsewhere, before this industry or the sector really takes off and is adopted by businesses? So I'll start off with Brad.
Yeah, so a couple things that we've touched on even in your framing of the question. So one would be definitely the way that Marius highlighted liquidity at the beginning. Again, that's one of those chicken or egg. People don't adopt it unless there's enough of those counterparties and liquidity available. And so it's really about kind of both having supply and demand emerge and kind of interoperability between assets of interest, and then the marketplaces that facilitate that interaction and that matching process, whether that's through centralized exchanges or DeFi as it happens. Certainly kind of that regulatory clarity as well. Oftentimes that's what happens with new technology. It's new, it doesn't fit exactly into the paradigms that have existed today. So I know, again, there's lots of countries around the world, groups around the world, industry working groups around the world that are working really hard to kind of get this clarity and kind of drive the industry forward. And then maybe the biggest one that I selfishly personally spent a lot of time at Ripple is also usability. It is a new technology. It's maybe hard and to initially adopt if you're not familiar and kind of have worked with it. And so that's a lot of what we do, is thinking about how do we kind of make an enterprise-friendly solution versus a thing that is in your garage you're okay using, but you don't necessarily want to be running a bank on today. What's the gap there? How do we fill that gap? How do we make it easier to adopt? And so I think those are three ones that come to mind for me.
Yeah, Marius, curious to get your perspective as well.
Yeah, sure. So we're talking here about a new way of engaging for, I would say, clients or people in transactions. And the world it wasn't born yesterday. We do engage in financial transactions. We do fly planes. Things happen, and shipment from China are reaching Los Angeles usually with no problems. So what's going to change here, or how we can make this better? And the main issue, besides what Brad was referring to, is to make this transition. And by that, I mean, how do we make it so that the legacy systems, the way things have been done sometimes for many, many years, are not completely thrown out, but there's an interoperability of tokenization with the way transactions are recorded right now. There is an interoperability between the way diplomas of universities in Europe are being notarized and accepted with this new wallet mechanism, because if not, there will be no adoption, because the way it has been done for 20, 30 years will stick, and the new way, even if it's better, will have difficulty unless there is some regulatory pressure, unless there is regulation. And as an ex-regulator, I can tell you that sometimes you need to push a good thing into the market, and it's not natural that a better technology, a better way of dealing takes place. And I'll just make a concrete example. Instant payments, or an ability to send payments instantly, wasn't adopted by financial market in Europe, and it had to be made mandatory. And only then it was adopted.
Yeah, definitely hear you on just it's very difficult to get governments or established companies to overhaul their legacy systems and adopt a new technology. It's a process that takes a lot of time, and quite frankly, some education isn't involved in terms of helping folks who are in charge of those systems understand the benefits of the new technology.
Can I actually make another point?
Yeah,
just a quick one. Well, if you would ask someone, what's the benefit of internet, people would definitely, will say, yeah, information, Netflix, what's the benefit of web streaming? Netflix, right? But if you would ask people, what's the benefit of edge computing? Or what is the benefit of cloud service? People will not understand. But the two elements that I was talking about, edge computing and cloud, is the thing that makes broadcasting on internet feasible.
Yeah.
So when we talk, then we want, and your question was what needs to be done. When we talk about tokenization or how things could be done better, we need to somehow sell this to broader masses or put it into some package so that businesses understand the benefits beside this lower level technology. And I think this event is a good example of how we can do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's almost a matter of, it's like once you have the if you think about the internet, the applications that are built on top of the internet or leveraging the core internet infrastructure, that's when you get the benefits for the end consumer. And that's when folks really absorb, wow, this new technology has the ability to change my life or improve it. So hopefully we'll see the same thing happen within the tokenization, with tokenization technology and blockchain. So that's a great segue into our next question, which is really curious to get your guys' thoughts on how businesses can prepare for a tokenized economy. Are there things that businesses can do today to get ready to adopt tokenization technology? So I'll start off with Brad.
So of course, start from your customer. What are their needs? Are they coming to you already because they've adopted this technology and they're asking you for a certain use case, or are you really trying to find ways that you would internalize this technology to improve their experience? So definitely start with that in mind, because there's a lot of hype, and so you should definitely have your grounding on what that means. At least within Ripple, though, we think any use of blockchain digital asset technology relies on really 4 primitives that you need to have some strategy around, whether that's the thing you build yourself or thing that you rely on an external party. So that would be kind of liquidity that we're talking about, like how do you actually have access to be able to trade and transmit value for the tokenized or kind of digital crypto native assets that you're working with. On and off ramps, how do you get value in and out of your system or in and out of the chain that you're working with or the tokens that you're predominantly working with? How do you store those securely? So a custody strategy. And then compliance as well. So how do you do all these things in a compliant manner such that you can really offer this business at scale? For Ripple, example that would be for Liquidity Hub, we work with crypto payment service providers. These are often companies that do already have demand where somebody has crypto or a stable coin, and they want to, as a merchant, accept that and then kind of pay out fiat to their suppliers or whatnot. And so they need to have some way of on-ramping that value. In this case, as a digital asset or token, they need the liquidity access to be able to trade that value for a fiat currency if that's what their kind of ultimate beneficiaries need. They need an off-ramp to send that out back into the traditional financial system. And then custody, they need some way to store these assets, during this business flow. And so I think, again, kind of to where I started as a business, as you're seeing kind of this opportunity for this technology, this is a good lens, at least at Ripple, we often think about of, okay, how do you then facilitate the end-to-end experience by solving for each of these for the needs at hand.
Marius, any thoughts on your end?
Mm-hmm. For digital native businesses, probably what we are talking about is obvious, and they are already ready, and maybe what they are looking for and what they should be ready is to not lose track of fast-changing regulatory environments. And even specifically for those who have a global perspective, because there's quite a big disalignment of how this process is being viewed across the globe. And maybe sometimes, jurisdictional choice should be taken into consideration when deciding where to place your business if you are a digital native business. For those who are in, let's call them physical world, strongly planted, let's call it traditional businesses looking for process efficiencies and how this technology can make things better, cheaper, faster for them. I guess the biggest hurdle for them is to go over internal gatekeepers like compliance and legal, and people who are used to doing things the way they have been for many years. And the best way to prepare is to, slowly, with no push, introduce these new concepts and to try them out. And in preparation, Kirsten, I will mention that. I really implore businesses to utilize multiple regulatory and not even regulatory technological sandboxes where you can play around and fail with dignity, if I can say so, with no pressure, because that's where you should be exposing your internal resources, your internal decision makers to what can be done and what actually cannot be done. And I'll also stress what Brad said, be careful of those who are promising that everything is possible, because usually it's not.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you for those comments, Marius. So before we get into the audience Q&A, we have a final question for both Brad and Marius. What are your final predictions or trends when it comes to tokenization that you'd like to share with the listeners? So Brad, feel free to go first.
I'm always loath to give predictions because most predictions are wrong, especially over longer timescales. But I work at Ripple because I do firmly believe this technology is here to stay. It's a good thing for the world. So I think the safe future prediction is that we will continue to be talking about this adoption. We'll be talking about how much it's advanced year over year. Maybe the other perspective that I tend to have too is, in the same way you were talking about, are you an internet company in the 90s, early 2000s? Now people are saying, are you a blockchain company or a crypto company? At some point that won't happen anymore. In the same way that you don't ask, are you an internet company? Basically, any business has some aspect of their business that relates to the internet. And I think that will largely be true, certainly in the financial sector, but I think even beyond, we'll see that true for blockchain and digital asset technologies. And so then maybe the other advice, even though you didn't ask for it, is same way Marius said, like, continue to educate yourself. It's a very quickly evolving space. Really find good trusted resources, find several of them. And that way you can stay in touch. And so in the same way that you needed to learn the internet, now you need to learn this technology and find the best resources for you to do that.
Pass it over to you, Marius.
I'll try to predict, but my disclaimer, it will be very futuristic. In this future world, we all will have perfectly diversified portfolios of financial and non-financial assets. We'll be able to hold pieces of Rembrandt and have our toes somewhere in an emerging technology business in China. Everything will be possible for us. And everything will be tokenized to the limit, where there will be no need to change assets or these pieces of ownership into cash or some medium of exchange, so that when you want to buy or obtain some item, you just exchange it to another item. And this exchange of item to an item, regardless if it's financial or non-financial, will not require a medium of exchange. That's the world of ultimate liquidity. But that's very futuristic, but that's where we should be aiming to. In the meantime, I believe that the concepts of automated market makers, which are proliferating in distributed exchanges, I think they could be taken into mainstream and applied to the places like, usual marketplaces, which right now are being intermediated by intermediaries, which are living in these semi-transparent worlds and extracting value. And maybe we, as citizens of the world, we can not only be just buyers and sellers, but we could be, for example, market makers of those tokenized assets. And if I have excess liquidity of something, I can just put it into the pool and facilitate transactions for the people which I have no idea that they even exist, and that they engage in those transactions. So that's my vision.
Very exciting vision of what the world could look like. All right, so let's shift to our audience Q&A. I see some questions have come through via the message board. So let me project the first question. With tokenization, will there be multi-tokens or just one? And if there's more than one, will they be, I think, interoperable with each other? So yeah, I think this is a super interesting question. One of you guys want to take a crack at it?
I can take that.
Okay.
This is, I think, brilliant question, because it's the essence, right? When we talk, let's talk about the simple things that people understand. Money, there's only one issuer of US dollar, Federal Reserve. There used to be some at the beginning of the century and last century, and it didn't work out well. Now, tokenization of real-world asset can be done by multiple entities, or could be done by multiple protocols, and a protocol is just a collection of rules. One set of rules, one type of tokenization of maybe the same asset. So it seems that if the answer to this question is multiple, then we are not solving the issue, because here we're discussing the issue of tokenization and liquidity. So we will not solve the issue of liquidity, because we disperse the liquidity into multiple tokenized items or multiple reincarnations of tokenization of the same physical asset. How can it be done? Is a very good question, because we cannot force people to utilize one particular technology for tokenization. And if we allow them to engage in multiple technologies or multiple entities who engage in tokenization, and they can choose, then the answer is there will be multiple. And interoperability is always the second best, because you can just enforce singleness of money, singleness of assets, singleness of token. But then you have to choose what you want. Enforcement or innovative disruption, but at the cost of not completely interoperable.
Yeah, makes sense. Brad, any thoughts here?
Yeah, actually, I'll tie this to another question that I can see on the side, because I think it's related. It's this other question about how can we architect standardized cross-chain protocols, ensure seamless tokenization, transfer, liquidity, management of real-world assets across diverse blockchain networks. I think that exactly ties into the tension Marius called out, where it's like, if you get everybody on one, that interoperability challenge is not as hard, but getting everybody on one is by default very hard, and also somewhat against the way in which this decentralized technology has emerged anyway. I think, again, I'll analogize to the internet, the same way where internet and its definition is this concept that there's disparate networks that started to kind of be able to interoperate with each other. And that came from the internet protocol and other standards that have been developed since then. I think there's a similar set of exercises happening in the blockchain space. So this decentralized identity protocol is emerging. And I think, though, the trick there, actually, even Ripple itself had worked on and contributed to a protocol, the interledger protocol, which is really in this vein where it's trying to have the most simplest, narrowest scope kind of protocol that is needed, that kind of subsumes the nuances of different tokens and chains, but really focuses on just that value transfer aspect. And I think, again, we're in that early enough phase where I think there's a lot of smart minds thinking about this, but I think there'll be one of that interoperability strategies that emerges as a good one. I don't want to point a finger to one that exists today, where I think you'll still have, enough differences and enough, opportunity that are specific tokens that kind of meet different needs. So like a trade finance token may need extra capabilities, smart contract operations than, say, a carbon credit. And so there'll need to be some differentiation amongst those. But I think that value transfer that will come from interoperability will come from the value transfer standardization. And I anticipate that kind of emerging as enough of these use cases get adopted.
If I could add to this on the issue of interoperability, it's not, again, a process which resolves itself naturally. What do I mean by that? If a certain tokenization solution or an asset market is better or worse than the other, people would naturally flock to the one which is better. Mm-hmm. And to use a very, again, concrete example, if a certain currency in the eyes of global citizens is better, more stable, more useful, more trusted, and you make it completely interoperable with a less developed country currency system, that's not exactly in the interest of that country to make it fully interoperable, because that would lead to the concept which is called dollarization, or complete disintermediation of that currency. And the same applies to tokenization. Because tokenization could be done by multiple entities, it's not in the interest of those entities naturally to make it fully interoperable. It has to be enforced by some standards, by some kind of derivative value propositions that, unless you are interoperable, no one will use you. And then you have to balance it out.
Fascinating. All right, let's get to the next question. So a little more tactical here. How does a real world asset actually get tokenized on the blockchain? So any
I'll take the first step here and see if I can cover it all. So obviously you need to have some asset in particular you're thinking about, like whether that's gold, whether it's real estate, or whatever it might be. You need some way to store that in an auditable, traceable way in the real world. And because the act of tokenization is, having confidence and being able to prove that that real world asset is owned or managed by kind of some particular actor or consortium or group. And then you go and represent that as a token on a chain. So maybe you have Ethereum, maybe you have a XRP ledger or different chains that let you create tokens, either using a smart contract or natively. The act of creating that token involves the management of the lifecycle of that token. So you're able to mint or create that value representation on the chain. You can set rules about who can be transferred with, whether it can be fractionalized or not. And then, of course, as people redeem and remove that value back into the real world, you need a way to destroy or burn that token on the chain. And so it's really kind of that mix of, how do you ensure that in an audible, trusted way you've captured that real world value somewhere, then you've transferred and represented as a token, and then you get the benefits of all the tokenized technology in that life cycle, and then at some point it gets off the chain and back into the real world.
I think Brad did a really good job, but it's not as simple as it is, because if it would be as prescriptive, because the question is asking for almost like steps, what needs to be done to have from I start with real estate and I end up with tokens which represent pieces of ownership or some claims to real estate. This process could be done in multiple ways, utilizing different ledgers, different concepts of shared ledger or It could be done and verified on between the parties which kind of know each other in a trusted network. Or we need to enable completely anonymous transactions, which should be enabled by such tokenization process. And the answer to this question is very nuanced, and that's why we have so many different solutions which offer tokenization. And there is no single right answer, because multiple ways of tokenization of assets have either benefits because it's much more easier to implement, and those who are much more easier to implement, they have drawbacks sometimes of not being so secure. And what type of security are we talking about here? Because tokenization is almost a digital twin of a physical asset that you're representing in some sort. And the transactions or transformations that are happening on this digital ledger should ensure that no one is being able to do something of the same sort on the physical world with that asset. For example, selling the share of a house, which I recorded and tokenized on a distributed ledger, but at the same time selling that share on a physical register where the house was registered in my name. That's double transactions. How to ensure that? We need some trusted party or custody, which Brad was referring at the very beginning. Who does the custody of those tokenized assets and ensures that the link between the physical and digital world is a secure one.
Awesome. So I'm going to get to the next question. Quite a few questions coming through. So Brad, you actually touched on this question earlier in one of your responses, but I wanted to formally put it up on the screen because this is an actual question from our audience. How can we architect a standardized cross-chain protocol to ensure seamless tokenization, transfer, and liquidity management of real-world assets across diverse blockchain networks? So Marius, I know you have a point of view on standardization. Maybe you can be the first to pontificate on how this could potentially be executed on.
I'll be transparent. I don't know the answer to this question, because it requires consensus agreement on what are the main building blocks of tokenization, so that regardless of what particular underlying technology you use, you stick to these blocks or items and you execute them in a certain fashion. And there is no body, there is no regime, and that's why I was referring to the gaps that we need such a standard to emerge, that then we can prescribe that my particular way of implementing tokenization is following this standard. Then, regardless of what technological solution I use, what kind of ledger or chain I use to implement that tokenization, is conforming to that standard. And maybe to use an analogy here, there are multiple ways of wiring the house and provide electricity, but there are some principles that which I have to abide as an electrician. And regardless of what particular wires I use, I need to stick to that standard. So if such a standard of tokenization of real-world assets will be established, and high-level prescriptions could be established either by some body or the market itself, it could be market-led initiative of tokenization of real-world assets. Then I guess interoperability issue would be addressed as well.
Any thoughts, Brad, on your end?
Not that much, actually. I mean, I agree. I mean, my phrasing of it is, as much as this is a technology space that we care about, there's a lot of people involved here in coming together to do something like this. It's the way Interledger looks at this, because I'll reference that's something that Ripple's worked on in the past, is kind of trying to find kind of something that's what is really agnostic between ledgers, between representations, such that there's like the simplest protocol that can just talk about transferring value. But given how quickly the space is evolving, like even to that, like how does that evolve? So even once you have a standard, how do you evolve the standard as the technology evolves? So it's kind of both the moving target and one that we haven't landed yet. And so my belief too is like this is a thing that will probably evolve from the market, or at least there's enough kind of adoption where there is a preferred body or consortium that can come together to really propose something. But I guess my view is also that in the interim, that's an opportunity for innovators, for businesses to come in, to be those kind of facilitators to move value between chains, to enable this type of thing in the absence of a standardized protocol to date, and then hopefully that one would be adopted from what happens to work in practice.
Makes sense. So we have about 8 more minutes left. I want to make sure we get most of these questions in. So let me share this one. Are there any downsides to tokenization? We've talked a lot about the benefits. So just to provide a well-rounded view, might be good to hear about like potential drawbacks or a friction within the system when it comes to tokenization.
Can I start?
Yeah.
Again, maybe linking to the theme of our webinar here, the impression or the perception that a certain market is liquid or there is no liquidity risk involved can create perverse incentives for agents to engage in excessive transactions, excessive risk taking in that particular asset class. And it works until that perception of perfectly liquid market is maintained. But sometimes we have perturbations or some unexpected events, and you bring your collateral to the market and no one takes it. And you need cash. So you bring your tokens and you try to generate some alternative tokens, and you realize that the link is broken. You want to rely on this interoperability mechanism, interledger solution, and it's not there. So what I'm trying to say here is that tokenization seems to be promising that, like in my very futuristic example, everything will be possible ultimately. And ultimately, everything will be perfectly liquid. If that is being really taken for granted, then we have a problem. And that's the downside of tokenization, that it cannot promise stability in an ultimate sense, because tokenization is designed in such a way that maybe you can even tokenize tokens. You can put layer on a layer, and that in itself creates inefficiencies. We already talked about one subtle inefficiency, because you need interoperability, right? And yeah, that's I think a drawback.
Anything you'd like to add, Brad? Or
yeah, two quick ones that come to my mind. I know we're kind of close on time. So one would be maybe that theme there is kind of there's new risks, so there's new known unknowns and new unknown unknowns, to borrow those phrases, because it's a new technology. And so you might be reducing a counterparty risk in one place, but now you're relying on a technology that you may not be as familiar with, or may not be as mature from the abilities to manage it and govern it than you would have had historically. So it's just the newness of tokenization is a risk to adopting any new technology. I think the other way to think about this, I think even Marius said it earlier, like there are downsides to tokenization for some actors in the space too. So if you're kind of a centralized entity, or someone that's taking on the coordination of a thing that now this technology actually, mediates or takes over, that business doesn't necessarily need to exist in the same scale or size it has had before. So certainly, again, like any new technology, like I think AI is going through this right now with ChatGPT and LM, it does shift potentially, where there needs to be focus of humans and businesses to go to new areas. And so certainly for for that, it could be a downside for some of the space.
Last question here, and then we're going to wrap things up. And this is probably more for Brad. How can Ripple's infrastructure enhance the efficiency and scalability of asset tokenization, especially for global assets like real estate, art, and equity?
Yeah, so Ripple, you can think of two parts of Ripple. So one is the enterprise solutions that we bring to customers today, which again is cross-border payments capability that leverages blockchain for efficiency and on-demand value transfer across borders. Liquidity hub that enables you to tap in and as a business buy, sell, and hold digital assets. And then we've actually recently, as a company, acquired Medico, which is a custody provider. So some of those elements that I shared earlier about liquidity, custody, cross-border payments, those are things that Ripple's infrastructure enables. We don't specifically have the solution that's the real estate solution or the art solution or specific types of tokenized assets. But we believe that those core technology capabilities like Liquidity Hub to be able to kind of manage, trading these funds or, in the future, different tokenized assets against crypto, the on and off ramps that come from our payments business. But then coming at it from the other side, Ripple also contributes to open source, particularly XRP Ledger, which has kind of native capabilities for NFTs. Since the beginning of the XRP Ledger over a decade ago, it's had the ability to issue and manage tokens and trust lines that enable how they can be transacted with other parties on the system. And so, I think the way Ripple, our strategy is about to have, enterprise offerings and these core primitives that lets you interact with these capabilities. But for maybe a business or a specific use case, you would be leveraging either XRP Ledger or other blockchain technologies that would then plug back into our kind of more standardized enterprise infrastructure.
Perfect. So we are pretty much at time. So I want to thank the speakers, Marius and Brad, for this really lively discussion. I think it's very insightful for myself and hopefully the folks on the call. If anyone has questions about how Ripple or SuperHow can help support your tokenization or liquidity needs, please reach out. We will be sending out some contact info as a follow-up to this particular webinar. We'll also share a link to this recording in case folks are interested in rewatching pieces. But thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it, and hope people found this to be interesting.